So this happened about 3 years ago, when I was living in this old apartment building on the east side of the city. It was one of those places that looked charming in the listing photos. Tall windows, original hardwood floors, radiators that clanked through the winter like old friends, settling in for the night. The kind of building that had been there long enough to have a personality of its own. I loved it, honestly, at least at first. I was on the 4th floor, apartment 4A. The building only had 2 units per floor, so my only neighbor up there was whoever lived in 4B, right across the narrow hallway from me. When I moved in, the property manager, a tired-looking woman named Denise, who always smelled faintly of coffee and cigarettes, told me that 4B had been empty for a while. She said it like it was a casual thing, like it didn't matter. I remember thinking it was actually kind of nice, a little more quiet up there, a little more private. I didn't ask how long a while meant. I probably should have. My apartment was small, but I'd made it comfortable. I had a little reading chair by the window that looked out over the street, and I used to sit there in the evenings with a mug of tea, watching the neighborhood settle into night. There was a coffee shop on the corner that kept its lights on late, and I could see the warm amber glow of it from my chair. It felt safe. It felt like exactly the kind of life I'd been trying to build for myself after a pretty rough couple of years. Quiet, simple, mine. Imagine the soft sound of a radiator ticking in the dark, the distant murmur of a street below, the feeling of being the only one awake. The first thing I noticed was the smell. About 6 weeks after I moved in, sometime in early November, I started catching the scent in the hallway when I came home from work. It was faint at first, something almost sweet, a little musty, like old paper or dried flowers left in a vase too long. I figured maybe the building was just old. Maybe there was something in the walls. Old buildings have all kinds of smells trapped inside them. I didn't think much of it. I'd come home, unlock my door, go inside, make dinner, normal evening every evening. Then one night I came home later than usual. I'd stayed at the office to finish a project, and it was close to 11 when I finally got back. The hallway on the 4th floor was darker than normal. One of the 2 overhead lights had burned out, and it cast the little corridor in this uneven, half-shadow kind of glow, and that's when I noticed the smell was stronger, much stronger, and I noticed something else too. There was a thin line of light coming from under the door of 4B. I stood there in the hallway for probably 30 seconds, just looking at it. It was such a small thing, just that sliver of light, pale and steady, under a door that was supposed to belong to an empty apartment. I told myself Denise had probably let someone in to do repairs, maintenance stuff, or maybe someone had finally rented the place and was moving in. That made sense, right? That was the reasonable explanation. I went inside, locked my door, and made myself a bowl of soup that I barely tasted. There is something about a light in a window that should be dark, something about it that the body notices before the mind does. I texted Denise the next morning, casual, friendly, just checking if someone had moved into 4B, I said. She replied a few hours later with a short message. No, still vacant. Are you having an issue? I told her I'd seen a light under the door the night before. She said she'd look into it, and that was the end of the conversation. The light wasn't there when I got home that evening. The smell was still there, though, still that sweet, papery, faintly wrong smell, drifting in the cold air of the hallway like something slow and patient. A week passed, nothing unusual. Then 2 weeks. I started to relax again, started to tell myself it had been nothing, maybe a flashlight left on by a maintenance worker, maybe a trick of the light from the window at the end of the hall. I went back to my evenings in the reading chair, my tea, my quiet street below, the coffee shop on the corner, the amber glow. Everything felt normal again, and I was grateful for that. I am someone who really deeply needs things to feel normal. But then I started hearing it, just barely, just at the edge of what you could actually call a sound, this low, rhythmic noise from the other side of the wall I shared with 4B. It happened at night, always late, always after midnight, a slow, measured kind of sound, like footsteps, but not quite, more like something being dragged very gently across a floor, back and forth, just barely there, the kind of sound that makes you wonder if you're actually hearing it, or if you're just listening too hard to the silence. Close your eyes for a moment. Think about the wall beside your bed. Think about how thin walls really are. I started keeping a little log of it on my phone, just simple notes, time, duration, what it sounded like. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct toward documentation, maybe, toward making something feel manageable by writing it down. The notes looked pretty plain when I read them back. 12:14 a.m., about 20 minutes, dragging sound, stopped on its own, like a maintenance record, like something completely explainable. But writing it down didn't make it feel explainable. It just made it feel more real. I mentioned it to my friend Cara over lunch one Saturday. Cara is the most practical person I have ever met in my life. She's an engineer. She has a spreadsheet for her grocery shopping. She once talked me out of a panic attack by making me describe the thread count of my bed sheets. I knew she'd have a sensible take. She asked me a few questions. Had I checked the building's utility schedule? Could it be a pipe? Could it be the elevator shaft? And then she told me to knock on the door of 4B. Just knock, she said. If nobody answers, you'll know it's nothing. If somebody answers, you can talk to them about the noise. She made it sound so simple. I want to tell you that I went home that afternoon and knocked. I want to tell you I was that brave, but I didn't do it that day. I walked past the door of 4B 3 times between that Saturday and the following Wednesday, and each time I slowed down a little, and each time I kept walking. There was something about that door. It was identical to mine. Same dark wood, same tarnished brass number, same little peephole, but it felt different. It felt like it was doing something a door shouldn't do, like it was listening back. I finally knocked on a Thursday evening, 7:30, still some daylight coming through the window at the end of the hall, the building quiet around me in that early evening way. I stood in front of 4B and I knocked 3 times, firm and clear, and then I waited. Nothing, just the building settling, just the faint traffic from the street below. I knocked again, one more time, and then I stepped back. No light under the door, no sound from inside, nothing. I stood there for another moment, feeling a little foolish, and then I went back to my apartment and called my mom and talked about nothing for an hour. Sometimes relief and unease feel exactly the same, a quiet that should comfort you but doesn't quite reach you. The sound stopped for almost 2 weeks after that. No dragging, No smell in the hallway, or at least nothing I could be sure of. Maybe it was still there, and I'd just stopped noticing it. I began to genuinely believe I'd worked myself up over nothing. Old building sounds, stress from work. I'd been running on not enough sleep for months by then, surviving on coffee and deadline adrenaline, and I know what that does to your perception. Everything gets a little sharper and a little more frightening than it needs to be. I told myself that's all it had been. And then on a Tuesday night in January, I came home to find something outside my door. It was sitting on the floor, propped neatly against my door, a small glass jar with a metal lid, the old-fashioned kind, like something from a pantry. Inside it were dried flowers, small ones, purple-grey, tightly bunched, tied with a piece of brown twine. There was no note, no explanation. The jar was clean and the flowers looked old, but carefully kept. I stood there staring at it for a long time before I picked it up. It smelled like that hallway. It smelled exactly like that hallway had been smelling for months. I brought it inside because I didn't know what else to do with it. I set it on my kitchen counter and I looked at it for the rest of the evening. I googled the flowers. It took me a while, going through image after image, but I eventually figured out they were likely dried lavender mixed with something called sweet everlasting, which is a wildflower. Both of them have this old, papery, faintly herbal quality to their scent. Both of them are flowers people have historically used in various folk traditions. Around the dead, I found that out while I was eating a very sad bowl of cereal at 10 o'clock at night, and I put my phone face down on the table and didn't pick it up again for a while. I put the jar in a cabinet. I didn't throw it away, which I still find strange when I think about it. There was something about it that felt like it deserved to be kept, like throwing it away would be impolite to someone, somehow, which is not a rational thought. I know that, but it's the thought I had. I told Denise about the jar. She was quiet on the phone for a moment, and then she said she'd been meaning to tell me something about 4B. She said the unit had been vacant since the previous tenant, an elderly woman named Mrs. Albrecht, had passed away. In the apartment, she'd been alone, and it had been some time before anyone realized. About 3 years vacant, Denise said. She'd had trouble renting it out after that. Some people are sensitive about those things, she said. You know how it is. Mrs. Albrecht. I turned that name over in my mind for days afterward. I looked her up. Her name was common enough that I didn't find much, but I found a brief obituary from a local paper, the kind that community papers run with very little detail. It said she had been a resident of the building for over 30 years. It said she had been a lover of gardening, of old books, of the neighborhood she had lived in for most of her adult life. It said she was remembered by friends and by the building community. And then there was a line near the end that I read a few times. She was known, the obituary said, for leaving small gifts for her neighbors, dried flowers, homemade preserves, handwritten notes slipped under doors. A quiet presence, the obituary said, who made the building feel like a home. Let that sit with you for a moment. A quiet presence, the kind that stays. I'm not going to tell you that I know exactly what was happening in that apartment. I'm not going to tell you I'm certain about any of it. I am someone who likes evidence and documentation and practical explanations, and I can list you half a dozen reasons why the sound in the wall was just the building, why the light was just a maintenance worker's forgotten lamp, why the jar was maybe left there by someone else entirely, another tenant, a friend of the late Mrs. Albrecht, who still had a key. Some explanation I never thought of. I can list all of those reasons. But I also kept the jar. I moved it out of the cabinet after a few weeks and set it back on the windowsill in my kitchen, where the afternoon light could come through it. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, when I came home late from work and walked up the stairs to the 4th floor, I would catch that smell in the hallway, sweet and papery and faintly herbal, and instead of feeling afraid, which was how I'd felt in the beginning, I just felt noticed. The way you feel when someone in a quiet room glances over at you and gives you a small, acknowledging nod. I see you. You're here. That's all. The sounds in the walls stopped completely around March. The smell faded too, gradually, over the course of the spring. By the time April arrived, and the windows started letting in the first warm air of the year, the hallway smelled like nothing at all, like any hallway in any building, neutral and ordinary. And I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I missed it a little. I missed feeling like there was someone on the other side of that wall, keeping to their own space, keeping their own hours. But there, a new tenant moved into 4B in May, a young guy named Trevor who worked in tech and had a lot of packages delivered and played video games at a volume that occasionally vibrated through the wall. He was perfectly nice. He waved at me in the hallway. He held the elevator. Normal, living person neighbor sounds. I should have been relieved. I was mostly, but I found myself thinking about Mrs. Albrecht more than I expected, about 30 years in an apartment, about leaving flowers for your neighbors, about what it means to be so settled in a place that some part of you doesn't quite know how to stop being there. I moved out of that building about a year after all of this happened, not because of any of this. I want to be clear. My lease was up. I found a better deal on a place closer to work. The normal reasons people move. The last thing I did before I turned in my key was go out into the hallway and stand there for a moment, just quietly, just for a minute. The 4th floor was still and empty, feeling the way it always was. I looked at the door of 4B, Trevor's door, with a little printed name card in the slot and a small recycling container he'd put outside it. And I thought about the woman who had lived there for 30 years, and I said quietly, just barely out loud, "Okay, I'm going now." I don't know why I did that. I don't know what I expected, if I expected anything at all. The hallway was quiet. The radiator was off for the season, and there was just the low, neutral hush of a building in the middle of the afternoon. And then, very faintly, from somewhere in the stairwell, or from the street below, or from nowhere in particular, I smelled it, just for a second, sweet and papery and herbal, gone as soon as I noticed it. I stood there another moment, and then I picked up my last bag and walked down the stairs and out into the afternoon. I still have the jar. It's on a shelf in my current apartment, my 3rd apartment since then, and I've carried it through every move. The dried flowers have faded even more. They're a pale grey-silver now, barely holding their shape, the twine around them loose and soft with age. They don't really have a scent anymore, but I keep them. I keep them the way you keep something that was given to you in kindness, even if you're not sure what the kindness was for, even if you're not entirely sure who gave it. I told the story once to my sister, late at night, sitting on her porch in the summer with the sound of crickets all around us. When I finished, she was quiet for a while, looking out at her garden in the dark, and then she said, "I think she just liked you. I think she could tell you'd take care of the place." I don't know if that's true, but I've thought about it often since then, and there's something in it that feels right. Not frightening, not mysterious, just true, in the way that some things are simply, quietly true without needing to be explained. Thank you for letting me share that with you tonight. I've never written it all down in one place before, and there's something about doing that, about laying it out from beginning to end, all those small details in order, that makes it feel more real and somehow more settled at the same time, like the story has a shape now, like it can rest. I hope wherever you are right now, you feel settled too, warm, safe, like someone has noticed you and found you worth noticing. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for listening all the way to the end. If the story reached you in some quiet corner of your evening, I'm really glad. Close your eyes now, let your shoulders drop, let the sounds around you soften and blur. You don't have to figure anything out tonight, just rest. If you'd like more whispered stories just like this one, subscribe to the channel and come back whenever you need something slow and gentle to carry you towards sleep. Take good care of yourself.